Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined once again by Jim Orr and Laura Bradburn. Welcome back to the show, Jim. It's been a couple of weeks for yourself. Laura, you were here last week.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Good, Paul. Fine, thanks.
Yeah, not too bad.
Plenty to discuss. Now, it's been a couple of weeks, Jim. I'm going to start with yourself. So, what changed? What's changed, if anything, in your mind? Because a couple of weeks ago, you were quite fixed in your view that everything had to change, and that included the manager. We're now a couple of days away from creating a world record, a quadruple treble, and a lot of Celtic fans, I think, have relaxed their views slightly. Others are saying, why are you still talking about the manager? I'm of the view that a couple of results haven't changed a great deal. It may be signs that we're going to salvage something from this season. What's your view over the last couple of weeks, Jim?
I think things haven't changed at all. That's my big concern. I think over the last 2 weeks, there's been quite a number of things happened. If I go back 2 weeks, it was the Trust Zoom meeting, which was really interesting. Mm-hmm. You then had the statement from the club, which was shocking, appalling, atrocious. And I'll come on to that in a minute. With the Lille game on the Thursday, and there were some positives to take from that. There was the planned Sunday protest, which I thought was a bit bizarre again. There was Kilmarnock game, some positives and negatives. There was the AGM, bonkers, absolutely bonkers. But if I go back to the statement was a thing that really annoyed me. Because I don't mind the boards telling you half-truths or spinning stuff, but it was so patronising, so patronising. And I brought it along because I would forget what it said. And the kind of subtext was basically, we don't think the manager's doing a good job. We're not going to get rid of him. We don't have anyone else to come in. So we're going to stick with him. And we'll have a chat in a few weeks. And then we'll see what happens next. Mm-hmm. And if you saw the AGM on Monday there, Ian Bankier, what a performance he put in. Did you see it?
I was watching the live text, Jim, because we had a broadcast on at the same time.
Every 2 minutes, hello, my name's Ian Bankier, drink of water, put it down. And today we're going to drink of water, so on and so forth. But the point from last week, well, what he actually said in that meeting is that what was good about Peter Law, he makes decisions. Well, he didn't make a decision a week past on Tuesday with that statement. Mm-hmm. But the line that got me, and I've been on a few weeks now, I think after the Sparta Prague game, Neil Lennon did his post-match interview, and you just zoomed on in the word culture. What's all that about? How can he say the word culture? And you have to be careful of the words you actually use. Mm-hmm. And the line from the statement, they said, basically, we're going to keep Neil. But also said that equally important is to continue to operate according to our club's values. Values. What does that mean? What does values mean? Because to me, what annoyed the hell out of me about this, it was so patronising. Patronising me, you, Laura, the 54,000 season ticket holders, and however many Celtic fans around the world wide. Patronising. Values. Because if you go back a number of years, the club spent maybe about a decade of being cheated. Another club didn't submit documentation to the SFA. Where was the values there?
I know.
Where were you standing up? And the same club didn't take tax off their players. And we lost out in buying players because they weren't taking tax off players. And Glasgow's a village. Glasgow's a small place. You know, they would have known that. Mm-hmm. So where was the values there? Patronising Peter. Yeah, where was the values there? Nothing happened. And if you want to talk about values, the guy who had values, Fergus McCann. And if Fergus McCann had been in charge back there, he'd have nipped that in the bud straight away because he was someone who stood up for the values. And the ironic thing is that Fergus McCann saved Celtic, and if he was in charge, he would have saved Rangers because he'd have nipped that in the bud straight away, and they wouldn't have gone 10 years accumulating all that tax liability. He'd have just zoomed in there the way he dealt with Jim Farry. He was into the SFA, says to Farry, what's happening here? Not right, not right, not right. You're out the door. Mm-hmm. And that's what would have happened back in 2000, whatever it was, 2004, you'd have walked in and said, you're not on. What's the rules? You haven't registered these players. What does that mean? 3-0 defeats. What does that mean? They get relegated. Now, this is not me making things up. This stuff came out in a court of law. So where were our board, our chief executive back then? Mm-hmm. They were sitting in their hands at the back of the bus, waving to the front. Where's your values there? They don't exist. And then if you fast forward to 2012 and Resolution 12, I know that's been done to death, but it should be done to death. And I know there's people who don't know what Resolution 12 is. But basically, the same club had a tax liability for 10 years, didn't pay it. And UEFA say, if you've got a tax liability, you're not allowed in other competitions. And our board must have known that. What did they do? Sat in their hands, back of the bus, nothing. So don't patronise when you talk about values. And to add insult to injury, a group of supporters for the past 7 years have tried to do the job of the club. And the club have ignored them and patronised them and kicked all this stuff down the road. And then the ultimate insult, AGM on Monday there, what do we think of this? There's nothing to see, 99%, it's out the door, beat it. Mm-hmm. And guys like Aldheed, that's his name in social media, and a number of other fans have spent the last 7 years trying to do something that the board should have done, because these group of fans actually do care about the values. So don't dare talk about values to the supporters, because it's not on. It really isn't on. And there's been tons of stuff happening in the last 2 weeks. It's just despairing, really despairing. And the point you made a second ago is that, and I've said this to you before, that nothing has changed as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, in the past 2 weeks. Don't let 2 good results. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed at all. And if you let that mask what's happening, then nothing will change. And the whole point of what happened last Sunday, in my opinion, again, that's down to results. And I was confused last week because on social media last Thursday, there was going to be something happening on Sunday. The Celtic Trust looked to be behind it. So you see the flyer on social media, and I'm thinking, what's the objective of this? Nothing. There was nothing there. So you go on the website, the Celtic Trust website, and there, I mean, don't get me wrong, the Trust are good guys. David Lowe, Celtic fans owe him a huge debt, because although Fergus saved the club, David Lowe laid the foundations for that. Jeanette Finlay, another good guy. But what the Celtic Trust were going to do was, there's going to be a protest, and what we'll do, the Celtic Trust, is we'll go in and make sure nothing bad happens. It'll be socially distanced, and there'll be masks, etc. And I'm thinking, wow. Because if you watch the videos from the first Sunday, there was a man chasing the bus, and he slapped the bus. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was like a scene from Blazing Saddles when the guy punches a horse. There's a man hitting a bus. How totally bonkers was that? And then there's a guy picks up a fence and chucks a fence, and the Celtic Trust are going to go along and steward that. What happens if the bus slapper guy's there? What chance have you got if that's going to happen? But then you think, well, what was it about last Sunday? I don't know. I really don't know what it's about. Because to me, this is all about bad results. And people talk about self-entitlement and all that kind of stuff. And that's how it does come across. You know, because, why didn't this happen last year? If this was about the board, if this was about Peter Law, why didn't we do this last year? Why not? Because we won 9 in a row last year. And if we were 13 points clear at the moment, if we'd won a Europa League group, if we'd been undefeated, none of this would be happening. So this is happening because of results. And some of the banners that you've seen, you're thinking, disband the PLC. What? What does that even mean? Now, I understand sack the board, because that's a 90s term. But we're in a different world now, because back in the 90s, you could get at that board, because that board were not wealthy men. That board weren't that clever. That board had no business acumen. That board were in debt. That board had to find millions of money for a new stadium. So they had a limited lifespan. And when we did the whole Save Our Celts thing in 1990, when it was only 2 in a row for Rangers, and people are saying, don't be daft, it was inevitable what was going to happen next. So sack the board, although nobody can ever sack the board, you knew that, that the time was coming, the clock was ticking, they were going to disappear at some point. But if you're going to put banners up, in my opinion, you don't put disband the PLC. That's like stop the sun from shining. It's a public limited company. That's not going to happen. Another thing, just to finish, and I'll let Laura come in. I agree with Kevin Graham the other day. If people want to complain, on you go. If you want to make noises, on you go. But there's a way to do it. And 2 weeks ago, I think it was, the kind of much maligned Green Brigade, who are not everyone's favourite, they got it spot on. They sent 4 or 5 guys up to Celtic Park with a banner, with a very succinct message that said, if we're going to save the 10, Neil has to go. They also put a statement out, giving the logic behind it, and they join them both together. And they stick that in social media, and it goes viral. And then the mainstream media pick it up. And then they're even asking questions of the manager and the chief executive.
Yeah.
That's how you protest. That's how you protest. And the thing also that annoyed me with having the same view as Kevin, absolutely fine to complain, but not in the middle of a pandemic, not when people are dying. And what I found a bit disturbing last week, although when I first saw it, I thought this is good. Because when the bus came in with the players and the fans started singing, maybe a few hundred Celtic fans, Celtic, whoa, ho, 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 blah, blah, blah. And Shane Duffy, apparently the hairs in his neck were standing. And I thought, that's really good because, these guys haven't been able to do that since March. That's really good. And then I thought, oh, no, that's not a good thing to do. Because every other club can now do that. And I saw something the other day saying, for the cup final, Hampden, let's do the same thing in the middle of a pandemic. No for me. By all means, complain and make your points, but there's a way to do it. And the Green Brigade, for me, got it spot on. And just to end this, and to let Laura in, is that in the Zoom meeting 2 weeks ago, a young guy, forget his name, part of the GB, Green Brigade. I mean, he looked about 12. Everyone to me looks about 12, but he was brilliant. And what he said is the GB met with Peter Law, and they asked a question about added value on the season ticket. Yeah. And Peter Law turned in and said, the added value is putting a winning team in the park. Patronising. Laura, over to you.
Well, I love hearing from yourself, Jim, because you obviously lived through the sack the board days in the 90s. You were so concerned about it from a financial aspect and where the club were going that you were pivotal in setting up a campaign, a movement, a street movement, Save Our Celts, which came before Celts for Change, because you'd seen it fairly early doors. So I always like to get your view on where we are now, because it's a completely different situation. And what David said last Friday when Laura was on last Friday, David Lowe, was that the club are very well run. You've just got to look at how stable the club is going to be, even after this period of time where there's clubs staring down the barrel of the gun all over the country. And that's fine. So when you're saying sack the board, I think what we need is we need to be more succinct in what it is the Celtic fan base want. But one of the biggest interesting points that you continually make, for me, is how a couple of results, and this was something that you experienced in the early 90s, Jim, the momentum of your movement would slow down if Celtic signed a particular player.
There was actually one particular week where we had a public meeting, 400 people in there, the media were all there, Brian Dempsey were all there, bit of momentum, and then we beat Rangers twice in a week, and that everything's okay now. And everything's not okay just now, you know. And the thing about what happened last Sunday, when people took to the streets 10, 20, 30 years ago, they had a chant. What do we want? Something. And when do we want it? Now. Do you know what the something was last Sunday? I don't. What do we want? Rid of Neil Lennon? Rid of the chief executive? Get rid of the PLC? What was the thing that said, what do we want? This. And that's the bit that, as I said, I don't mind people complaining. Absolutely fine. I have concerns of public people getting together in large numbers. I don't think that's a good look. I don't think it's a good look. And if other teams start to do the same things, who can blame them? You know, so I'm not sure what the big thing was, but what I said 2 weeks ago, or whenever I was last on, was that we had to change the manager. And I won't bore you with the logic again, because I said the logic before. There came a tipping point. And for me, once you pass the tipping point, I don't blame the manager anymore. I blame the chief executive, because the Hibs game was a tipping point for me. So what came after that, Sparta Prague, Ross County, Milan, St Johnstone, that's the chief executive's fault, because he could have changed it. And what he should have done after the Hibs game, to try and save a bit of face, he should have said, Neil Lennon's a legend at this club, and he came in, whenever it was, 19, 20 months ago, in our hour of need, and got us over the line, and got us the 8 in a row, and got us the treble, and he was our man. We believed he was the man. Last year, he made it 9 in a row. He won the League Cup. He won the Europa League section with games to spare, beat Lazio home and away, got us into the Scottish Cup final. The man's a legend. But for some reason, it's not worked out this season. And we think it's best at this point in time, maybe to go in a different direction. And we thank Neil for all his work he's done. And then Neil can sail off into the sunset. A hero, a legend. And all you then say is that the current coaching staff will look after the team until the new manager is appointed. And that way, you save face. Neil's a legend. And everyone would agree Neil's a legend. And everyone would have wanted Neil Lennon to have secured the 10. Right? But what I'm not going to play is kind of hindsight games. You go back and say, we should have done this and should have done that. He was given a lot of money. He was given players to add to the squad he had last time. Where we are just now, it's his fault. And I'm also not going to buy all the stuff that talks about John Kennedy, because he's your favourite, and Gavin Strachan, etc. If you're the manager, whether it's a football club or you're running a car sales showroom, whoever reports to you, that's your call. So if John Kennedy is not performing to a level that Neil Lennon is happy with, then Neil Lennon should get rid of John Kennedy. So if you think John Kennedy is not doing a good job, that's Neil Lennon's job for letting him be there. That's my view.
No, I don't disagree with that. And you know my thoughts on the situation with the coaching staff.
The snood guy.
Aye, the snood and the snooze. Now, Laura.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You've been waiting patiently, listening to Jim's views on the last couple of weeks, and I think one of the biggest things I would take from it is this patronisation, the lack of communication I've been very critical of in the past. What was your views on the AGM and the way that Peter Lawwell was basically saying that, you know, we are good at communicating? I mean, look at our SLO, and that isn't a dig at JP Taylor, because I've got a lot of respect for JP. I think he does a great job. But you can't just say we communicate well because we've got a good SLO.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, apologies if my camera cuts out. I'm wrestling with some new tech here, so if it cuts out while I'm talking, I'll keep talking. But if you want to talk about patronising, if you want to talk about ignoring the wishes of the fans, if you want to talk about showing a lack of ambition, it goes a lot further back than the AGM this week. It goes back to the day after the Scottish Cup final last season, when they came straight out and said Neil Lennon is Celtic manager. Neil Lennon's, that's the choice we're going with, we're keeping him. And to show such a lack of ambition to follow up a manager of the calibre of Brendan Rodgers, with all due respect to Neil, who's had his shot, didn't leave on the best of terms for whatever reason. it just shows a lack of acknowledgement that to take the club forward, you need people of a certain calibre to take the club forward. To pick up on the AGM statements that Peter Lawwell made, I mean, as somebody who, I get there's a lot wrong with social media, I get there's a lot of hyperbole on social media, I get that there's a lot of hysteria, but for Peter Lawwell to come out and say that particularly the reaction of fans on social media is over the top about what's happened in the last few weeks, it's two things. One, it's just not true. Now, that there have been some over the top reactions, as there are in all circles. I think some of the reaction of the fans that turned up at the stadium after the Ross County game was certainly over the top. I don't think anybody with a reasonable mind condones it. Some of the things that are said on social media are not condonable, but for the majority, I'm steeped in all this stuff with Twitter and all that kind of thing. People are just frustrated. They're just voicing their anger. And yes, in days gone by with Celts for Change, with all the other organisations, the only way you could make your voice heard was to physically turn up places and make your voice heard. For him to denounce social media and the voices of the fans that are expressing themselves through that way is just kind of, it shows a lack of acknowledgement of the modern times and what life is like nowadays. You've got to just acknowledge that is the way people are expressing themselves. That is how they're getting across their frustrations with the club. And that is a perfectly valid way to do it. Obviously, don't condone the people that take it too far, but there's certainly a place for social media in the modern world. Look at what we're doing right now. Without social media, broadcasts like this, podcasts like the ones that we're having on over the charity weekend wouldn't exist. That is a positive for me going forward, and we need to integrate that into what the club is doing and make more of a place for it. To pick up as well on the overall patronising tone. I mean, you and Jim have been obviously around a lot longer than I have in terms of Celtic support. But even younger fans like myself, I'm coming from a family where my grandfather was born 10 years after the club was founded. My family throughout the generations have been fans. Even the youngest people in the support know the history as well as anybody knows it. Mm-hmm. So please don't have a bunch of businessmen come out and tell us that we need to remember the values of the club. We know the values of the club. We are the values of the club. We need to make sure that our voices are heard and that they know that, yes, they're financing things. Yes, we know that they're doing a good job and we don't have to look too far to see what happens when a bad job is done. You could easily be without a club if that happens. Mm. But please don't tell us that we don't know what we're talking about, that we don't know what Celtic stands for, because we do. And at the end of the day, what the values of the club are irrelevant if on the pitch we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. At the end of the day, we are also just a football team, if you want to put it that way. And at the end of the day, the values of the club have to be reflected in the success on the pitch.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And I think Jim made a great point, Laura, that you've reiterated there in terms of the values, Jim. You can't, on the one hand, say that the fans aren't living the values when, in actual fact, it goes much deeper than that. When things like, unpaid taxes are being ignored, the five-way agreement is in place, but Peter Lawwell's never seen it. I mean, if you want to talk about patronising, in the 2019 AGM, he claimed that he's never seen the five-way agreement, which was copied into Eric Riley. So when you're talking about values, is it part of the values just to lie to your fan base or to your shareholders?
I think words, as you know only too well, are very important. And that's why you pounced on culture. Because it's dead easy to say something. So your question to Neil Lennon would have been, do you want to expand on that? Do you want to explain that? And when the chief executive uses a word like values, do you want to tell us what that means? Do you want to expand on that? Do you want to explain that? but obviously don't do that. And the AGM you're not expecting anything from it. I mean, my expectations are really low. We've had this chat before about if you've got high expectations for certain things, you'll be disappointed because the expectations are too high. What did I expect from Monday? Nothing. What did I expect them to do? I expected them to kick out the Resolution 12/11 guys.
Mm-hmm.
And for the guys who've spent all that time, 7 years of their life, and I've only recently seen some of the stuff that they did, and they were painstakingly trying to word things to make sure that it complied with this, that, and the other, and a ridiculous amount of time just to be ignored. And see if the vote was maybe 60-40, you'd have said, well, that was unlucky. 99% not interested.
Not interested
Just
in the slightest.
Really, really shocking.
No, I know.
And just to pick up on that as well, I mean, I've heard a lot of people on the podcast and on various other sources that I listen to saying we need more communication from the club. We need more conversation. We need more. At this point, I don't want any more communication from the club. They have made their position very clear. I just want they've made their attitude towards the fans' dissatisfaction very clear. I wouldn't care if they didn't put out another statement for the rest of the season. I just want them to make the decisions that bring back the success on the pitch that we have all seen is deteriorating rapidly.
But they're so out of touch, and that's the thing. 2 examples. I think it was last week when I went on about the email that we all got last Friday about Celtic merchandise with the heading for the Celtic store where supporters support. And you think, how mad is that? And then I've seen something in the social media. Natasha posted that. They get some sort of mini hamper. Did you get a mini hamper, Paul? Laura?
No, I don't.
No, not did I. And you're thinking, how ridiculous is that? Somebody decided, here's a good idea. Let's send people, but only some people, a hamper. How mad is that? How totally and utterly mad is that? Somebody said, here's a good idea.
What if Natasha gives you a oatcakes though from that hamper, Jim? Will you be happy?
Absolutely.
We could maybe arrange that.
The point is that somebody said this was a good idea and somebody rubber stamped it. Somebody thought it was a good idea to say the Celtic store where supporters support was a good idea. I mean, it's unbelievable how insensitive they are, patronising they are. So who makes those decisions? Ultimately, it goes up to the top. But moving off at a tangent here in terms of what's been going on the park, and if I jump back to the Leo game,
Yeah.
and people were encouraged by that, I was just totally frustrated watching that game. Because when I first came on the podcast, when you first asked me on the podcast 10 weeks ago, the week before we played AC Milan the first game, before the Glasgow derby, and I was saying that in any other year, Europe's a big thing. That's how you measure yourself. Beating Lazio compared to beating Hamilton, no contest. But this is the year, or was the year, of the 10. So what we had to do was to try and do everything we could to try and win that 10. Not have anything that's going to impact on it. The least risk as possible. And I said something at the time, and the comments were saying, who's this idiot talking rubbish?
Yeah.
And what I said at the time was, don't forget Europe, but we've got a squad of 28 first-team players. And to quote a bumbling idiot, they should be oven ready to come into the team. It might not be your top men, might not be your star men. So what we should have done, we should have taken Eddie out of the equation, Kalmack, Christie, Bruni, Ayer, maybe Barkas at the time because he was the goalie. Because if you play European football, you might get COVID, you might get injured, and you'll definitely be fatigued. And the most important games were going to be on the Sunday. So don't do that. Don't play these guys. Who do you play instead? Dembele, Connell, Turnbull, Sorrow, Hazard. I even thought of Hazard at the time. And what would that have done? It would have given you a chance to see if these guys can hack it against AC Milan. And if they could hack it against AC Milan, then you've no problem playing them against Hibs, St Johnstone, never mind Hamilton Accies. And the reason these guys, Turnbull and Sorrow, didn't play, I think, in my opinion, is the manager wasn't confident they could have done a job. But imagine if Sorrow and Turnbull in particular were thrown in against AC Milan 10 weeks ago and played the way they played against Lille. We had a Glasgow derby the following week.
Yeah.
You'd have been confident throwing them in there. And the reason we are where we are today is because decisions like that weren't taken. And that's why we're in the state we're in just now. Turnbull and Sorrow were great, and that's a whole different debate in terms of this Sunday. Who do you play with? But all of a sudden we've got some options.
I think
not done that. Sorry, Laura.
No, that's all right. I'm in
you go,
total.
sorry.
I'm in total agreement. I came on the day after the Lille game, and everybody was on a high because we won the game and we played so well. And I questioned at the time, what is Neil Lennon seeing in training that he didn't think Sorrow and Turnbull and that were ready. The more that I think about it, to pick up on what you've said, is I think a selection of a lot of those players was nothing to do with how they've performed. It was a decision made either based on some sort of, lottery system where they just kind of randomly selected players to go out just to give the other players a rest, or like you say, they were thinking higher risk being in Europe this season, so we just need to go with what we've got. But the more that I think about it, the more I think we're not in a situation where Lennon's making decisions based on what he's seen in training. He's making decisions based on other things that we don't understand at the moment. So
I think you're right, because the point I would further make, because we've got such a big squad of 28, then you should be able to throw any of those players in to any game. It's not as if we're going to play one of the youth players or development players or Paul John Dykes, and you might think, what are you doing? We're playing first team players. Mm-hmm. And to have not used that squad and to have been so appalling with the substitutions this year, and I know it's a drum I keep beating, 5 subs. It's been appalling. So we've not tested the players so we could enhance who could be the kind of main guys, and we don't use substitutions properly. And that's why where we are just now is the manager's fault. And a decision should have been made, in my opinion, because I thought it was harsh before the Hibs game, and I explained the logic behind that. But after the Hibs game, that's when he should have been relieved of his duties. And the man, according to Ian Bankier, who takes decisions, didn't take a decision.
No.
So it's on him. And what you've then found since then, there was a wee 2-week period, certainly, when the manager was just drowning. And the chief executive, like, standing on a boat waving at him. And he's sinking, and he's sinking, and he's sinking. And he needed somebody to throw him a lifeboat. I sound like Ken Graham. And let him sail into the distance as a bit of a hero. But he's sinking, and the chief executive is just watching that. And he might come back in a few weeks' time to see how low down he is. And at that point, he might give him the boat.
Jim, when we're talking about this communication issue being patronised and then going, further into the point made by Stevie Mullen yesterday about how they pay lip service at these AGMs because obviously they're trying to protect everything that's going on in the background. If you dig deep enough, do you think for a moment that Peter Lowell maybe has made a decision? Do you think that the club perhaps have made a decision, but it's not something we can put into place until January?
One would like to think so. That's it. One would like to think so. Because if it's not, I don't understand what's happening. Because we've heard all the stories after the Glasgow derby that people like Martin O'Neill or Roy Keane had been sounded out. So obviously, that was the smart thing to do when they saw things were starting to go a bit pear-shaped, see what's there. And it just could be the fact that nobody wants it. Nobody wants to come in and take this on. Mm-hmm. Because, I think yourself and Stevie said yesterday, it's a different thing bringing in Big Sam to stop you getting relegated and put 10 men behind the ball. It's quite a different thing going out and trying to play expansive football and win football matches if that's not your way. And I think it's quite difficult maybe to bring in a manager. But that's their job. Their job is to have their finger on the pulse, to know that at some point, because I think Neil would have left at the end of this season, whether we get the 10 or not. So there should be, hopefully, they had somebody in mind next season, and if they could accelerate that and bring him earlier, then that's the thing to do. And one would like to think they've got somebody lined up. One would like to think that.
I'm just going to bring up one of the...
I seriously hope it's not Roy Keane, because I think we're...
No, hopefully not,
I think you would be falling down the same trap there of going for somebody who knows the club, somebody who's a Celtic man. Yeah. What is he showing on paper to say that he's a manager worth his salt? Nothing he's for my
not
mind.
A contender, Laura, you're right. Not a contender.
No, I totally agree with that, Laura. And I have mentioned it quite a few times when it comes to Roy Keane. When you look at his managerial career, as you say, you look at that. Don't look at the fact that there's a connection to the club. Because, I mean, when you look at his managerial career over the piece, 181 games. He's managed 181 games. And again, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one season was in the top league in England and the rest were in the Championship. So he's been out the game in terms of being a manager, being his own man for a number of years. And the big question would be, would he do a better job than what we have at the moment? I would say no. I don't think he would. Would he be able to handle the likes of Edouard and Cham and others any better than the way Neil Lennon is handling them? I don't think he would. But again, it's all about perceptions as well. And I've got to thank Jim, because we were using the terminology which is much used in football by referring to managers as elite managers. And quite a few weeks ago, Jim challenged me and challenged the whole use of that term. What is an elite manager? Well, if you're an elite manager, you won't be in line to come to Celtic because you are probably either capable of winning a European trophy or at a club who's capable of winning a European trophy, or you've already done it and you're moving from big club to big club in the top leagues all around Europe. So, I mean, that's just where we are as a football club. We couldn't go for anybody in the top 3-4 of the top 5 leagues. So I've taken that one on the chin from Jim. But the management question, again, people are saying, we've won a couple of games, let's concentrate on the Scottish Cup final. It goes back to the point Jim made. But one thing I do need to bring up here, it's coming through from YouTube, from Charles Broadfoot, values, shoot the board. Well, you know, I think what you're seeing with that particular banner is one person, a tiny minority, because we're going back to this weekend, Laura. You've already brought up the quadruple treble weekend. And I use that term. I'm not taking it for granted that we're going to win it. I sincerely hope that we do. But it's such a historical weekend, and we're obviously doing our broadcast for charity, 24 hours over the weekend. You have a look at that. We're 15 quid away from raising £8,000. And that is in 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks. That's the Celtic support. That's the values. That's the way that I see Celtic fans coming together to raise cash for people that are suffering through mental health, homelessness, being unable to feed themselves and their kids, or kids who are so vulnerable that they're going to wake up on Christmas morning without toys. And Celtic supporters, largely, have come together to raise that level of cash. So for me, you can't use one banner that says shoot the board on it and say that's your Celtic mentality or that's the values of the Celtic fan base. I think you look at something like this weekend and you see a much broader view of what the Celtic support is all about. And again, that allowed me to mention the quadruple treble. There is a link underneath this video. If you're able to give us anything at all, it would be brilliant to smash through that £8,000 during this broadcast. So a fiver, a tenner, anything you can afford would be great. And all the details of the charities are on the GoFundMe page. It does bring us up to this weekend. I've seen a couple of reports, bizarrely enough, asking, is it all that important? Is it a big achievement? A quadruple treble? You know, this is the mainstream media asking that question. And, you know, I did get a really interesting message through Twitter from John Donnelly, who's unable to join us live, or he would probably comment, talking about getting taken to the 1965 Scottish Cup final. And Laura, believe it or not, I'm not old enough to have gone to that one. But at that time, Celtic had not won a trophy since 1957. And, you know, there was no guarantee up against a great Dunfermline side, which ironically had been built by Jock Stein, and they were still enjoying great success. And we won the game 3-2, we won the cup. Big Billy's famous header set us on our way, and the greatness started. That was the start of the great journey of the 60s and 70s. But when people have obviously lived through that, or lived through the period that Jim refers to in the 1990s, you do have that, you check yourself often when you're going through a period of success, and you remind yourself of, the club being saved in the early 90s, Jim, or us really trying to push the boat out to win one league championship to prevent Rangers from winning the 10 during Wim Janssen's years. So I don't think Celtic fans are entitled. I think that us with memories of days gone by certainly are not entitled. We just don't want those days to return. But also the quadruple treble, the achievement of that. All you need to do is you look at this season, you look at the League Cup, we're out. We're going through a terrible run of form. Ross County beat us fair and square and beat us well. So we're out that tournament. And people automatically think, well, there's Steven Gerrard. He's going to win his first trophy. That's how difficult it is to win one trophy. Never mind 12 in a row. This is an incredible weekend, potentially. A historical weekend where Celtic are not only breaking their own club's records, they're breaking world records. Potentially, I say. So let's have a wee look at that, Laura, and let's have a chat about the kind of messages, again, that are coming out of Celtic Park around who we're going to be playing. I would like to ask the question, does Neil Lennon have it in his locker where he's maybe thrown these out there, i.e. Scott Brown is likely to play? There's even a suggestion that Lee Griffiths might start. What's your thoughts on this Sunday, having seen the impact of Soro, Turnbull and Hazard particularly?
Well, it's kind of rubbing me up the wrong way. I swear to God, this camera just hears me talking and switches
Every
off.
time you start chatting. We can still hear you though.
I think the problem is that I heard, I think it might have been Stevie, I'll apologise to Stevie if it wasn't him, say, that Scott Brown, if he can't get up for a Scottish Cup final against Hearts, then what can he get up for? Same with Lee Griffiths, because they've get Hibs in their blood and whatever. If the team you're playing makes a difference to your ability to get up for a Scottish Cup final, then I don't know that that's grounds for you to be selected. You should be selecting people who are just want to play in a Scottish Cup final because it's a Scottish Cup final. And even more than that, relying on anything other than recent performance to select a team, to me, is a recipe for disaster. So you have to... And to further go on to that, I was having a wee look through Hearts' results recently. Now, I know they're in a lower league. I know they're in a playing against a lesser quality opposition, but they're never an easy prospect throughout the time that we've played them. I've looked at their results. They are free scoring in the division below. They've scored 6 twice this season. They have scored multiple goals most games, which, regardless of the quality of your opposition, you still have to have a certain way of playing football that allows you to score those goals. And given the way we've been cut open by various teams this season, I would be concerned. I wouldn't be overly confident that we're going to sweep them aside the way a lot of people seem to think we will. And the only way that we're going to have a good chance of doing that is going with a team that have put in performances against much better teams and shown that they can actually come out on top. Kilmarnock, arguably, are probably on a par with Hearts as far as levels concerned. Lille are certainly better, so why not go with a team who's beat better teams to try and overcome this one and get the treble?
I think so. Again, talking about the teams under, for example, Martin O'Neill, Jim, where we had club captains who didn't always play. But, when you're thinking about the preparation for this game, and you're in a hotel the night before the game, you've got the travel to the stadium, you've then got the whole pre-match build-up, you're in the dressing room right up to kick-off. The captain's job now is as important in that period as it is than it is on the actual park, because he hasn't obviously had his best season. We all know that. We've seen it. I mean, I analyse the games as much as I'm able in terms of looking at points where they've impressed and points where they haven't. I don't go into the analytics that some of the great guys like the Huddle Breakdown and Alan Morrison and guys like that do, Jim. But when I was looking at his performance just in the recent game against Sparta Prague away, in the first half. He was extremely poor. I mean, he lost 4 50-50 balls, which, that was Scott Brown's bread and butter. And from that, 2 chances, 1 goal were created. So I think Scott Brown's influence is undeniable. And even if he's not playing, that influence will still be there. But when you're looking at the impact that's been made by Turnbull and Sorrow and Hazard, and you're looking ahead to Sunday, Jim, is it a great deal of concern if Scott Brown doesn't play? Because you're still going to get everything that he brings to the team in terms of his influence, his leadership.
You mentioned Martin O'Neill. What Martin O'Neill's team had structure and organisation. We don't have that just now. And that's my concern. Who's in the team depends on the structure and the shape the teams play. And I'm going to sound like repeating myself again, but we should always play with 2 up front in Scotland. Mm-hmm. We should always play with only 1 defensive midfield player. The team, the players, at the manager's disposal means he has to play a back 4. So the team becomes 4-1-3-2, and then you start populating the teams. Whether he plays Brown or Sorrow, it's a toss-up. I think there are merits in playing one or t'other, and if no matter who he plays, if he wins the game, it's the right decision. If he doesn't win the game, whoever he plays, it's the wrong decision. For me, I would certainly play Scott Brown. It's a cup final. He's a course and distance winner. He knows what's at stake. He'll rally the troops. Sorrow's done great. It's only 2 games he's played. If he'd have played 6 or 7 games, I'd have said he's in a rich vein of form. We can depend on him. Not that we can't depend on him on Sunday, but on balance, I would certainly go for Scott Brown. But I wouldn't be that disappointed if he played Sorrow. Mm-hmm. But if it's down to me, I'd be playing Scott Brown and I'd be taking Sorrow aside and saying, look, son, you've been brilliant the last 2 games. And in fact, moving forward, because the 10 is the most important thing, I'd be inclined to go with Sorrow from now on. Mm-hmm. It's a one-off on Sunday. Scott Brown's done it before. Inspirational captain. He'll love a game against Hearts. It'll be a battle on Sunday. So I'd always want my captain in there. I don't think he's been as bad as people make out. I think he's won not very good games, but in the main, he's been kind of okay. And I just don't like the fact we keep playing 2 defensive midfield players. We push Callum McGregor up the pitch where he can score goals and he can make chances. And it's all about shape for me and populating the shape. And most of those ones will pick themselves. For me, there's only maybe 2 or 3 positions where you think either him or him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think El Yunusi's been on and off it, and if he was to drop out for one of the other players that we have in that position, Jim, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm going to bring up a point from Brian Morrison, who's commenting on Facebook. Welcome to the show, Brian. Mikey Johnson should start out left on Sunday. I've just mentioned El Yunusi in actual fact. The reason I bring this up, I do remember going right back to 95 when we beat Airdrie. Laura, I'm going way back before your time, I think, watching Celtic, but that was the end of a barren run. We hadn't won anything since 1989. It was 6 years, and we beat Airdrie 1-0, Pierre van Hooijdonk. And I remember after the game, at some point, the late, great Tommy Burns saying that he almost threw in Paul Byrne. Now, Paul Byrne had been out the side for ages. He came in, made a brilliant impact, scored a few goals against Rangers. He went right off the boil, put on a few pounds, and he was out the picture. But Tommy Burns explained that sometimes in a cup final, if you haven't been part of it and you get thrown in, as long as you're fit, of course, that the added pressure, it's almost as if you can play without fear because you haven't tuned yourself in, you haven't concerned yourself with playing. Now, Mikey Johnson's just back in the picture. I've heard a couple of people saying him. I personally would keep him on the bench. I think that he might be an impact if we do need one when the legs are tiring nearer the end of the game, for Hearts that is, to bring on Mikey Johnson. Do you think, Laura, that he has it in him? I'm talking about Neil Lennon here, to throw in a curveball, a Lee Griffiths up front, a Mikey Johnson out left? Do you think that would be something that Neil Lennon would do on Sunday?
He absolutely has the potential to throw in a curveball. Whether it's a good one or not, I don't know. It's like, again, though, I think the issue of fitness has to come into it. If Mikey Johnson is match fit, which I doubt, but if he is, he's certainly got enough there to just have a wee bit spark, make a wee bit of a difference. When El Yunusi, although competent in the last few games, has seemed a little bit flat-footed, it might be a straight swap that isn't actually too big of a risk. I think Griffiths is more of a risk because I think, as we've all seen from his last few appearances that he has made, he's certainly not match fit. He looks as if he's carrying a wee bit extra weight and things like that. I wouldn't see him as much of a potential addition to the team as Mikey Johnston would be. I think that providing that something different with Mikey Johnston, though, it might be a good idea, because if Hearts have been looking particularly closely at the way we've been playing, and a lot of people are saying this is why the Lille game worked so well, if Hearts have been looking particularly closely at the way we've been playing and have set up a plan and things like that, Mikey Johnston's the type of player that could come in and disrupt that. He could come in and offer something different that they wouldn't be prepared for. So I certainly see him as an option. Griffiths, probably not so much.
Now, here's another point coming in. I'm going to throw this one out to yourself, Jim, because we've been talking about what's changed in the last couple of weeks, and you basically said nothing. We've had a couple of reasonable results, a very good result, let's be honest, against Lille, because they're a quality side, and then a result that at home you would expect Celtic to win, playing against Kilmarnock. But I'm glad that we did, because we weren't in a good run of form, and anybody fancied their chances coming to play us. But Billy Boy 32, that's boy with an H, on YouTube. If Lennon changes the team and we win convincingly, will he be given credit, Jim? Now, the reason I'm asking you that is someone did make a point during the week on the comments. I don't think I had a chance to read it out, whereby they were bigging Lenny up for playing Sorrow and Turnbull, and then the counter argument was why has he not played them before? Going back to what Laura said, he's seen them at training every day, so why has he not played them before? I mean, surely he'd be given the credit if he picks a team you're not expecting and we win the game.
I've said this before, it's a results-driven business. We could go out on Sunday, play rubbish, score a last-minute winner. You get the credit because you've won the cup. And as I've said all season, we haven't played well all season. But up to the Hibs game, we'd kind of put the points on the board with one or two exceptions. So, absolutely, whoever's involved in Sunday, if we win the cup, everyone should be given thanks for doing that. But if you get 5 Celtic supporters in the same room, you're going to have 5 different views on things. And for me, the biggest issue I've had this season is one up front, because most teams can cope with that. We talked about the Kilmarnock game being a good victory. Well, we're rubbish in the first half. It was the Hibs game again. It was the St Johnstone game again. Patrick, knocked the ball about. Eddie up front on his own, not getting to the ball, because there's only one up. If you play 2 up, you move teams about. Mm-hmm. You can score goals for fun. This Celtic team will score goals for fun if you play 2 up front. And I would go with Lee, even if Lee was 5 stone overweight, I'd go with him with the first 45 minutes, because he'll turn them, even at 5 stone overweight. And he's the guy that brings the best out of Eddie. How did we win the league last year? Lee appeared in the scene, and all of a sudden, Eddie sparked into life. 2 good footballers, good movement, know what they're doing. You play 1 up front, it's easy to defend, because most teams, in this season have coped no bother. And Hearts, I'd imagine, will be thinking the same thing. Laura said, they'll be watching what we have done. Well, they play 1 up front, let them chuck balls into the box. We'll cope with that. Flood the midfield, keep it tight, nick a goal. That's how we'll win the cup. But hold on, they're playing 2 up front. They're moving us about. Well, that's different. I think if we play 2 up front Sunday, we'll win no bother. If we play 1 up front, it'll be another struggle.
I think you've just got to look at the performance against Hibs at Easter Road, your tipping point, Jim, whereby we're playing 1 up front with no width, so we're not stretching the Hibs defence at all until 71 minutes into the game, where we bring on Griffiths. There's 2 up front. We start stretching the back line. I still have concerns about the width in the Celtic side, in actual fact, and I think that Turnbull, with his creativity, with his delivery and his ball retention, has certainly helped that. And I don't mean he's a wide player, but he's been able to create from the centre. Mark, welcome back to the show. You're commenting on YouTube. I'm going to throw this one out to yourself, Laura. And we're asking about the goalkeeper. And it's a good question, because I think, personally, I've already said Hazard should start. I think he deserves a start. I think the big difference between him and Bain and Barkas is that he's been commanding the area. It's coincided or maybe even assisted Duffy in, finding some kind of form, which, as a byproduct of that, we've got Ayer out on the right, and he's performing particularly well there due to the El Hamid situation. It looks as though El Hamid's on his way out, and there's reports that Beersheva may be in for him in January. But there's been a few things happened, and it's not all down to Hazard, but obviously he has performed pretty well. How would you start in terms of your goalie on Sunday, Laura?
To go back to a couple of things Jim said, he's come up with good reasons why, although Scott Brown's not had brilliant performances recently, there are reasons you would put him in, there are reasons you would put Griffiths in. I can't think of a single reason you would put Barkas or Bain in, but I can think of a number of reasons you would put Hazard in. Like you say, he's commanding. He seems to organise the defence in situations where they haven't been organised by the other two goalkeepers. He seems to have a bit of a confidence and command that you would need. I don't think he would be fazed by the occasion. Again, this is all very kind of grand statements to be making about somebody we've only seen a couple of performances from, but you can only go on what you've seen, and I think I've seen enough to say he should be in. I would be concerned, and I would feel much more nervous, put it that way, if Barkas or Bain was in goal than if Hazard was in goal, which is a big statement to make for somebody who's made only 2 senior appearances, but that's just the way I feel about it. So,
What's your thoughts, Jim? We talk a lot.
I think Laura summed it up really well. Two things come to mind. The kind of people looking at Hazard and thinking, yeah, he looks okay. I think he's done okay. I don't think he's done anything spectacular. He's been okay for me. So I'm not sure about this kind of loving. I think the 3 goalkeepers are much of a muchness. I think what will be interesting on Sunday, because we talked in the past, is who signed Barkas. Now, if Neil Lennon has signed Barkas, then Barkas should play on Sunday. He should be taking Barkas aside to say, you're my number one. That's why I paid £5 million for you. The season starts now for you. Let's go and win the Scottish Cup. And I say to Hazard, you've been great the last 2 games, son. We'll try and get you more games. Here's a new contract, but I need to go with my number one. If that happens, that's because Neil Lennon signed Barkas. If Conor Hazard plays, I think Barkas is finished. I think that says to me, maybe Neil Lennon didn't sign Barkas. And if he didn't sign Barkas, and he's playing a guy, as Laura said, who's only played 2 games, and he puts him in the final ahead of Barkas, I think Barkas' days are numbered. And the thing is, I've heard people say things like, we should cut our losses. Madness again. We've paid $5 million for this guy. Would you do that with your finances? You go out and buy a car for 10 grand, keep it for a few months, and you think, it's maybe not the car I wanted. And your mate says, I'll cut your losses, sell it for 5. No, you wouldn't sell it for 5. You would hang on to it and get the best use of it possible. Mm-hmm. And if we start doing stuff like that, we'll end up like another team. We know what happened to them if you start being, so careless with money. So we don't really know who signed. The other thing that fascinates me, off at a tangent again, is how do you sign players? How did the Barkas signing come about? Who gets involved and at what stage? When you need a goalkeeper, is it Nick Hammond who recommends certain players? How do you recommend those players? What's the criteria? Who decides how much we can pay in terms of a transfer fee, in terms of wages? Is that Peter Law? Does Neil Lennon have the ultimate decision? Do they form a huddle? How does that work out? And who takes ultimate responsibility to say, that was my signing? Because one would assume it's the manager. And if he doesn't play him on Sunday, I'm not so sure it was the manager's decision.
It's an interesting one. Remember the leaked transfer meeting minutes, and you get an insight into the fact that there's scouts there. Tosh McKinley was in that meeting, Neil Lennon, Peter Lowell, and various others. So you do get, I think it was Lee Congerton at that time, Jim, who was the head of recruitment. It's now Nicky Hammond. So you get a whole kind of overview of the types of people who are inputting into these decisions. And invariably, if that's the strategy, which it probably is at many clubs, the manager isn't picking all the players. And I mean, you ask yourself, how many of the players is the manager picking in that case? You look at the amount of guys that come in and don't play, and that always makes me wonder whether or not the gaffer didn't fancy him from day one, but the club have gone ahead and signed him anyway. I mean, there's a story running today about Sved. He's made 3 substitute appearances for Mechelen. He's fallen out with everybody. But they've offered him a lifeline. There's another couple of £1 million down the tubes. And Rodgers made it pretty clear in an interview that he had nothing really to do in terms of signing that player. So, the Barkas thing, I take your point, and I think it will send a message, Jim. If Lenny doesn't play him, then it's unlikely Lennon has been the guy that's, said, he's my man, he's my number one, it's £4.5 million. Yeah. It's going to be difficult to cut your losses on that. I mean, the last £4.5 million that I can remember was for the Brazilian, Rafael. And you know how that ended. That was a complete waste of money. So,
I also think, Paul, if you spend that amount of time scouting that goalkeeper, and Stevie Woods, who we all think's a good guy, then Barkas must be a goalkeeper. There could be lots of reasons why it's maybe not working out. Maybe his English isn't that good. He's putting it behind a back 3, back 4. They're all over the place.
Yep.
So if Barkas got a run of maybe 10, 12 games in front of a solid defence or solid midfield, then we might see the Barkas that we thought we signed. I think it's too early to cut our losses on. And I wouldn't do that anyway, because we're just giving money away. And I don't think that's a good thing to do. So there's obviously a goalkeeper in there, and let's try and get the best out of him. In the same way we've done with other players. Shane Duffy comes to mind that, we thought to cut your losses with him, without saying, maybe he's starting to get there. Maybe there was reasons. So let's try and get the Barkas we think we've got. And if we don't play him on Sunday, I think that's a big statement to make.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of predictions. Before I do that, at the very top of the show, we were talking about our quadruple treble charity weekender, whereby we've got 20 podcasts all contributing shows over a weekend, 24 hours of broadcasts. We're currently sitting at £8,075. So thank you to Paul McGiffin, Edward McInerney, Colin Mackay, Danny McFadden, and everyone else who has contributed. But we've also had Patrick Doyle, Gordon Latimer, and Chris Byrne who have donated during the show. So thank you all very much for that. Laura, let's talk about a wee prediction for Sunday. Do you think Celtic will prevail? Do you think that our winning streak of 2 games in a row will be extended to 3?
I am too hopeful for it not to. I think we'll concede, certainly, but I would hope we would have enough to prevail. I would hope 2 or 3-1 is something that's on the cards, hopefully. That's going purely based more on emotion than sense based on the way we've been playing, especially if we switch back to the previous team. But I'm really just hoping we can pull it out of the bag.
He is hoping. Now, Jim, you've had a look at obviously the form in the last couple of weeks. Who knows until 1 o'clock or so who Neil Lennon's going to pick for his starting lineup. But how do you see the game going, even before we know whether or not the likes of Brown or Barkas or others are going to be featuring?
If he plays the right team, we win fairly easily, 3 or 4-0, I think. If he plays the wrong team, we'll have the usual performance and the usual result with it. We might scrape it 2-1, something like that. It depends on the team he puts out. At the expense of repeating myself again, play 2 up front, go for it, score goals, put your marker down, win the game.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to covering that. Laura, you're going to be part of the team on Sunday. I look forward to speaking to you again. New tech. When it's working well, so fantastic. And we will catch up with everyone else later on this afternoon, actually. We've got Tony Haggerty coming back in for a wee chat, so we'll be chatting to Tony about where we are now compared to where we were when we last spoke to Tony Haggerty, who's just written a book, and we'll be talking about that as well. But all that's left for me to say is thank you, Laura Bradburn, and thank you, Jim Orr, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.